It's an exciting video today.
It is an exciting video.
We're finally sharing our favorite books that we read in 2019.
That's right.
As a caveat, this does not include any rereads.
Totally
That
new.
is in a completely different video, which we'll link down below. This video is all just the new to us
new stuff that
we've read.
It's just like, yeah, this is great. Like, we want more of this. So that's kind of the deal.
So normally, I always say that I'm never going to do mine in order, because I find that very difficult to do. But this year, I was like, I'm gonna challenge myself to organize it in order, and Macky helped by like helping me like discern.
It's all about buckets.
What I felt very strongly about and what I felt strongly about, but maybe not quite in the same way.
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of able to put them in order. I mean, I keep changing my mind over like the top 7. Like they keep shifting positions.
And over time, your moods will make them shift. But
Yeah,
just
I think so, too.
but in terms of like the snapshot of
Like right
at
now.
this moment, because that's what these things are. They're kind of like milestone-y kind of videos.
Yeah.
That's what that is.
So right now, we're just gonna talk about, so it's a top 15 for me. And I'm gonna divide it into 2 groups because Macky's gonna come in with his bottom half. In between. I'll kick things off by starting with number 15, which is Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. I really enjoyed this book. It's a standalone YA fantasy about a girl named Elizabeth. She was left as a baby at this library, and she basically grew up there. And this library in particular houses grimoires, which are dangerous books of magic in the story, and they can do all sorts of powerful magic
grimoire
things. And the only people who are allowed to have access to them are sorcerers who have been approved for access. And so one day, Elizabeth encounters a sorcerer who just so happens to end up becoming her partner in crime as she fights to clear her name when she's accused of murdering someone who worked at her library. And so it's sort of like this fun, crazy ragtag adventure that they go on where like they get up to certain things and they try to figure out who's really behind all of this criminal activity. It's really fun. I think what I love most about it is that it reminded me of how I felt when I was younger and I used to read YA fantasies. I got so swept up in the story. I was so entertained by the characters. I think it was overall a really great book. Would I mind seeing another story from these guys? No, I would totally read more about them. This book was so much fun, and if you're looking for a standalone fantasy to just really like sink your teeth into and like devour this year, I would recommend this one. Number 14 is a book that I was really nervous about reading because I hadn't particularly loved this author's last book, but I'm happy to say that I really enjoyed this one, and that book is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I actually listened to this one on audiobook, did not read the physical book, and I think that's actually the way to go with it. This book is about a famous celebrity named Daisy Jones and a band called The Six, and it basically chronicles the tumultuous years of them getting together, working together, and then falling apart. It's so interesting because the format that she chose to tell it in is a bunch of press clippings and interviews, and they're from the different perspectives of the different members of the Six, people involved with them, and Daisy herself. And the best part of this audiobook, actually, in particular, is that it's a full cast, so every single perspective has a different narrator. And it works really well in helping you keep straight what's going on in the story and who's talking at this particular moment. The moments and parts of their story that Taylor Jenkins Reid chose to highlight with these interview snippets and these press clippings were so perfect for building them up in your head and making them feel like real people who just were living through like terrible different things in their lives. And just to see like this combination of people coming together and making music together and also like having all of this life stuff to deal with was so compelling, and I could not stop listening once I'd started it. So would highly recommend checking it out.
Awesome.
Number 13 is The Risk by Al Kennedy. The only ebook I think that's on this list, probably, officially. Anyway, that is the second book in the Briar U series, which is a spin-off from her Off-Campus series, and it focuses on a hate-to-love romance between Jake and Brenna, who are from 2 rival schools. Brenna is not a hockey player, but she loves the sport. Her dad is the coach at the Briar University. Jake is from an opposing team. And so they kind of obviously are antagonistic towards one another whenever they meet up, because rivals, right? But they find themselves in a situation where they can help each other out by doing something, and it does help that they also have sparks flying between them. And so the entire book focuses on how that relationship develops between them, and it's so good. I've enjoyed all the Briar U books, really, but that book in particular was just like, oh, it was so delicious. The chemistry, the swoons, the story, all of it really came together to be something I truly enjoyed, and it really gave me the same feels as the Off-Campus series, so would highly recommend checking that out. And then we have number 12, which is The Bride Test by Helen Huang. Mackie can attest to this. When I read this book, I laughed so much.
Oh, yeah.
And I was really loud about it. Like, I wasn't even trying to hide it at any point whatsoever.
It was a good time.
So I was really hesitant about The Bride Test going into it because it's an arranged sort of bride type story a little bit. In this book, Kai and Esme meet because Kai's mom finds Esme in, I think, Vietnam and offers her the opportunity to come to the United States, meet her son, and potentially see like if they could end up together, because she's concerned that her son will not be able to find that sort of relationship in his life. Kai is actually on the spectrum in this book, which makes it hard for him to process feelings and express them. And so that's already a pretty big roadblock in their story and their relationship. But over the course of the summer that Esme is there, they start to understand each other a little better. And it's really well done. You get the humor and the heart that was also in The Bride Test. It's done in a different way here, but it doesn't feel any less compelling. I really enjoyed seeing their relationship unfold. I liked seeing how both of them actually have their own character journeys to go on, and like what they decide to do about the future that potentially dangles in front of them. And I actually have to say that I particularly enjoyed how it ended. I'm not going to spoil it, obviously, but I think like the direction they decided to take it in, great idea. A great idea. So I really enjoyed this. Didn't love it quite as much as The Kiss Quotient, but I definitely think it is a strong addition to this series. Now, if only they would give me book 3, which is about the brother, Kai's brother, who I love and I have loved since book 1, I would be very happy about that. The next book was part of the Fairython reading we did this year, and I was so surprised by how much I loved it, even though everyone else was already like, this is a great book, it's a 5-star read. I was like, I'm always skeptical when people say that, because I'm like, well, what if I don't like it?
Yeah,
what if I'm like the weird one who's like, I don't care about it? But I shouldn't have worried, because The Darkest Part of the Forest was amazing. It was so good. Another standalone fantasy, which I love. It's a fae story, which I'm always 50-50 on, but apparently I like fairies if Holly Black writes them, so you know, whatever.
Same.
So it is set in a town called Fairfold, and there are 2 siblings who live in that town, Ben and Hazel. And Fairfold has like this odd position where they're sort of like in an agreement with the Fairfolk. Like, the Fairfolk aren't allowed to torment residents of the city. They can do whatever they want with like tourists. The people in the city, they just
are off limits, I guess.
Off limits. And like everyone in the city is sort of aware of how you can interact with fairies and what you should and shouldn't do. The reason why that sort of thing exists between them is that there is a glass coffin in the woods, and there's a horned boy asleep in there, and he's never woken up, and it's been like years and years and years until he actually does.
Oh.
And this is the story of what happens after he awakens.
That's cute. Okay.
It's so good. Okay, here's the thing. I was like, oh, it sounds sort of like an adventure story, and it kind of sounds like a good mix between like being in the human world and being in the fae world. I was not expecting it to actually have a deeper theme. And that's the part that threw me off and like gave me like a lot of feelings. First of all, it explores a sibling relationship and dynamic, and I love it because it's not just the good parts of having a sibling who loves and understands you and who was your only company growing up. It's also like the bad parts where like sometimes you can't see past how you've seen them in the past, or sometimes you think you're doing the right thing by not telling them something when it turns out they're also not telling you something and you're opposing each other. Stuff like that. And then the theme in general that is explored with the horned boy arc of the story, my goodness, I was not expecting that, nor was I expecting the resolution, and it totally just blew my mind, and in a good way, and I loved it. It also is written in a way that feels very much like a fairy tale, which I love as someone who loves fairy tales, so would highly recommend checking this out, obviously. We're at number 10, and technically we could talk about number 9 too, because they're sort of connected. Okay, so earlier this year, as many of you probably know, I went on a really deep Shadowhunters binge. Like, I'm talking like 3 weeks of reading nothing but Shadowhunters books. It was a time. Like, I was surprised by how entertained I was the entire time, and I was really, like, Mackie was just witness to me being, like, crazy emotional about it. Like, I'd be screaming about different things.
I don't need to be witness, because y'all uploaded that vlog of you sobbing at like 2 a.m. in the morning.
We'll get to that in a second. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the next 2 books. So number 10 is City of Heavenly Fire. Number 9 is Lady Midnight. And I put them pretty close together because my feelings are very strong about both of these in very similar ways, I want to say.
Yeah.
So City of Heavenly Fire is the 6th book in the Mortal Instrument series, which is the original series. And this book basically culminates the story of Clary and Jace and their friends. It is mind-blowingly good. To be fair,
really is.
like, Mackie already told me this, and I didn't quite believe because I was like, it can't be that good.
Even before I was Shadowhunter garbage, I had actually read this book like more than once because it's such a great way to end a series.
It really is.
It's a great way to end it.
So epic. It really brings together all of these elements that's been teased at since the very first book.
Yeah, and nothing feels like every payoff.
Characters have grown so much.
Yeah.
The payoff you get with every single one of them is so
It's all earned.
satisfying.
Every single payoff was earned, which I think is such a great
really was.
feat.
I loved it so much. I did not cry, though I did scream a lot while I was reading it. It was a really good book, and it's so worth it just to get to this part in the series. Funnily enough, it's actually connected to the other book that I picked up and showed you.
Only because it happens.
Because the two main characters in this book are actually in that book, but quite young.
Yes.
So this is Lady Midnight. This is the first book in the Dark Artifices series, and my favorite of that series. I enjoyed the series as a whole, don't get me wrong, especially because my favorite characters get such a big role in it. But the thing about this book is, and I told Macky this when we were talking about this video, I love it because it has a part that's a murder mystery.
It's definitely a murder mystery.
And I always find those fun. I think it's left over from my like Nancy Drew days. I just liked mysteries in general, and to set it in the Shadowhunters world, which I already really loved, made it even more fun to
be
read.
fair.
And plus, I love the Blackthorn. They're just like as near and dear to my heart as the Weasley clan is. Like, that's how much I love them. Because they are a bunch of siblings who are basically left on their own to deal with like all the different things that are involved in taking care of each other.
Yeah,
and they're so young, all of them.
And all of them orphaned, you know, obviously
at a very young age. And they don't even have the eldest siblings there, because both of the eldest siblings at this point are not in LA with them. And the one that's left to fend for them all is Julian, who is not even, like, he's 16 or 17 in this book.
And what makes them unique is that Shadowhunter families are usually small. Like, you don't...
their family's huge.
Their family's huge by Shadowhunter standards. And that you have that many siblings with that many issues interacting together.
There's seven of them.
It's a treat. It's a treat.
The mystery in the book is that Emma is trying to put together the clues that have been left behind after her parents have been murdered, only to find out that it ties to a bunch of other things in the Shadowhunters world. It's so good. I did not think I would like a Shadowhunter story set in LA. I'm not gonna lie. No offense to anyone who lives in LA.
That is true. I did not mind at all that this was in LA.
I like devoured this book so fast, and I was just like, it's so good, it's so good, it's so good. And it really was. Like, it was super compelling, super interesting, and the characters are great. So that's why it's number 9 on this list. The 8th book that I'm going to talk about is the first book I read in 2019, and also a book I actually have reread since, The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which I'm sure Kristen will be excited about because it made it onto this list. Anyone who has been on BookTube probably knows what the story is, but it's basically about a man named Quoth, who is an innkeeper, only his actual name is Quoth, and he has a bigger story than what he appears to be. And so a chronicler comes to the inn and wants to write down his story, and so he is telling his story over the course of 3 days, and this entire book is the first day of that story.
Wow.
So it starts from when he's a child up until around the time he goes to university. He's not that old when he goes to university either. He's like a teenager. Here's the thing. If you don't like Quoth right from the beginning, you're probably not going to want to keep going on with this book because it is such a deep, intensive character study into who Quoth is and what made him that way. Plus, he's telling it, so you know there's a little bit of bias there, even though he always tries to be, like, honest about what he's been doing or how he felt or anything like that. It's so good, though. Like, I just find it so interesting because there's so many details, and there's so many people, and there's so many events, and yet somehow he writes it in a way where it feels super compelling, and you're inclined to remember all of them fairly well. And the best part is, if you go into the sequel as well, you'll see how everything is starting to connect together, and it's so interesting. I love character stories, or character-driven stories. I have a soft spot for them, and I liked Quoth right from the start. So obviously, it was not surprising to me that I devoured this one so quickly. I definitely think it is worth the hype. 100%. Loved it.
So, my turn. I'm going to start off with The Wicked and the Divine, Omnibus number 3. And by the way, The Wicked and the Divine is a story set in a world where gods are reborn as mortals who have awakened to the fact that they are said gods of yore. Every pantheon you can think of. But there is I want to say a cabal, or like a circle of 12-ish, I forget the number, gods who always get reborn every 70, 80 years, 90 years I think, and are all fated to die and be reborn.
Okay.
Over and over.
Yeah, that's right.
This particular iteration of gods decides to sort of go off the rails
Rockstar.
And they all sort of, and by the way, when they are born into the world, or rather when they awaken as the gods who they're all kind of like, you know, very well loved and crazy. And in this era, they woke up as bloody rock stars,
which
all
is kind
of
of
them.
amazing.
And even the drawing, so you know, like Bale looks a little bit like Kanye, Sakumet looks a little bit like Pink, Lucifer looks a little bit like Bowie. What we're looking at right now by the third omnibus is, you know, what happened after they go off the rails. So the first book is just everybody figuring stuff out because it becomes a murder mystery. The second omnibus is about sort of like the aftermath of cleaning that up. And then when the really, really big ass reveal happens and things go really, really down and south and off the rails, this is the
How
aftermath.
much more off the rails are we talking about?
Apparently more. And it's crazy because these are very powerful divine beings that have stopped playing by the rules that they all agree that they would follow. So Kieran Gillen is the writer. It's really, really great stuff.
Kieran Gillen.
Right? It's got that DNA of Neil Gaiman and that sort of kind of writing where it's just a fresh take on mythology and, you know, pantheons. That's my top 10. Very good read. Can't wait. The next one's coming out next year, so I guess it's like a yearly thing.
Nice.
Which is awesome. My next favorite book of 2019 was The Very, Very Far North by Dan Bar-El. It's the cutest thing. It's about Dwayne the polar bear. It's illustrated by Kelly Fuzette, I want to say. It's pretty much like Winnie the Pooh set up north. It's that genre of kind of semi-allegorical, kind of whimsical little tales for young kids, I want to say. But then you have little gems. Like, my favorite quote from this book is, sometimes a day will surprise you and take you to the place where you want it to be. I'm paraphrasing, but it's that kind of thing, and it's a fresh take on it. It is a retelling. Every generation has to have a kind of story where you've got adages and lovely ways how to look at the world. That's what this is. Another really great book we've got in the mail, I want to say, and very much appreciate. I'm getting the next couple of books next year. It's going to show up on a TBR in 2020 for sure. It's called The Apprentice Witch by James Nichol. Now, this screams Kiki's Delivery Service. So those of you who know the well-loved Miyazaki film, it's about a young witch who says, it's my turn to strike out on my own and be my own witch. And she does. But the difference is, unlike Kiki, who is really just only good at sort of flying, and that's sort of like what the thing is, she's actually trying to master her spells, and she has her own whatever, goes to a small town, tries to be the town witch there, and faces something terrible that nobody expected anyone of her level to do it, and that's the story of it. She manages to hurdle those difficulties and really make a name for herself. So it's really great. I love it. It's very homey and classic, I want to say, and I would recommend it to anybody who loved Kiki's Delivery Service, who loves that kind of
like
a young girl who wants to, you know, find her place in the world and makes it, or makes her mark and says, I am here, and goes through a lot of heck to just go through it. Number 7 would be Kings of the Wild. This book is lovingly described as
I will always
Dungeons and Dragons campaign where everything is just a natural 1, which is the lowest you can get on dice, and terrible things happen when you roll 1s, or natural 20s, which is the highest you can roll in Dungeons and Dragons, and even better things happen. So there is no in between, and when I read it, I'm like, good grief, it isn't. And what makes it great is you want to throw in some Expendables in there, for those of you who know the Stallone movie that just came out like several years ago, where you've got a bunch of aging mercenaries in their 50s, 60s, whose glory days are long gone, but now have to be revisited because one of their kids is trapped in a war somewhere, in a siege, and only the band Saga can get them back. And Saga was known in its day for doing the impossible. Highly recommend it to anybody who loves Dungeons & Dragons.
Good.
It's a nice, quick read. You really can turn your brain off and just have fun. But if you are a Dungeons & Dragons fan, you're like, yep, that was natural 1. And oh, somebody rolled a 20, because nobody in hell would have survived that.
I know! Just... It's great.
And then they're you guys are just so screwed. There's so many moments like that. And it's great. And it's a party of characters that have not worked together in a long time but do, and they all have their roles. You got the wizard, you've got the rogue, you've got the warrior. It's really, really great. So I recommend that. And finally, rounding things up for the first half of my top 2020 reads would be the Witcher prequels. Now, before the Netflix series came out, it has wowed the world. Andrei Sapkowski, I want to say. I can't.
Sapkowski, yeah.
I'm totally butchering his name. Wrote these books. CD Projekt Red said, hey, can we get the rights to these and make video games out of them that happen after the books? And they're like, sure, why not? And then that blew up, and to this day, Witcher 3 is still winning awards years after it's been, because it's really good. Like, no other game has actually come that close to being that good on a holistic level, right? And then the Netflix series comes out, and so I played the games first, and then I thought, man, I gotta read the books. The books are great.
Them because of Kristen. Well, read the first.
Yeah, Kristen got into the Witcher kind of books. said to Alexa, you gotta read them, and I'm like, all right, I'll read them too. And they're very, very good. The collection of short stories that sort of, once you piece them together, will help you understand the lore of The Witcher, which is, I think, a great way story. I have never read an entire universe where it was just a series of short stories. And that's what you sort of start with.
I like it.
I don't know if Andrzej Sapkowski actually started with the short stories, but in terms of chronological order, I figured it would be great to just start there.
And that's what everyone recommends.
And that's actually what the Netflix series was sort of based on. I want to say marginally loosely, because they did change a lot of things for that iteration of it. And I'm not even that mad. Like, I'm not even mad at all.
I'm not mad.
So that's a great halfway mark to, I'm like, man, these books make it to Illuminato. My favorite stories of the short stories in those two books is actually an episode in the Netflix series.
Yeah.
Highly recommend it for anybody who's wanting to get into The Witcher. The books have a flavor that the TV just cannot capture. And that's not to say that the TV wasn't great. It is. But there's just so much more that you can dig when you actually go to the page. So do read it.
Okay, so now we are going into my top 7 books of 2019, and I realized in like the last 5 minutes while Macky was talking that all of these books are books that I very much screamed about. Like,
lots of yelling.
Maybe not necessarily to Macky in general, but like I definitely screamed about them to someone.
I was involved in
because there were like very deep feelings
pulling.
involved. So the first book, number 7, Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This is the story of the president's first son, Alex, and his relationship with the Prince of Wales, Henry. At first, they're very antagonistic towards one another, and they cause a sort of incident at this big event. And in order to repair the damage that this has done to both their reputations in the press and both of their families' reputations in the press, mind you, they have to pretend to be friends. Only in the course of them pretending to be friends, they actually become friends. And then after becoming friends, they discover that they actually might like each other as more than friends.
That's
and it's
great.
so
That's
delightful.
Just great.
This is the most delightful thing I've read in a long time. It just made me laugh at a lot of turns. It made me feel a lot of things at a lot of turns. And I think even the fact that there was a lot of political stuff involved in this, which I normally have a hard time reading because considering our political landscape, it's a little complicated. But it was just so nice to read the way it plays out in this story. It's such an entertaining contemporary read. The romance is really good. The friendships are really good. The familial situations are really good. It's just all in all a very, very enjoyable book. And I would highly recommend checking it out for sure. Number 6 is another book. Okay, this one, Macky was there when I read this. He can testify to the fact that I was constantly like, oh my god! Oh
exactly
my god!
Like that, but a little harder.
Because I don't think this part was in the vlog. The Red Scrolls of Magic, which is by Cassandra Clare and Wesley Chu. And this came out earlier this year. It takes us back to the era when Alec and Magnus go on their trip to Europe. It's so delightful because the story itself is that Magnus discovers that he accidentally may or may not have started a cult.
Actually, when I
and the ramifications of that, obviously.
When I read that blurb, I'm like, yeah, he would.
It's so much fun. It's a lighter Shadowhunters book, and after
it's the lightest one, actually.
After reading all of like the heavier, darker stuff that they have to deal with, which is all really good as well, it was just nice to have sort of like a buddy cop romantic comedy type story. Alec and Magnus are my favorite Shadowhunters characters, and obviously any story centered around them I'm already predisposed to like, but I didn't realize how much I would love this.
No, this was actually really good.
It was good because you got to see them sort of at the developing stage of their relationship, and knowing what you know about them now, seeing them here is so like, it just gets to you. But the other good part about this is that you see so many people that you know, and I literally was like screaming the entire time because I'm like, oh my god, this person's here!
There's a...
And you throw in a European setting, and I'm just like, my life is set. My life is set. I'm good.
There's an underlayer of lore here that I personally appreciated, by the way, while we're on the topic. Because for some people, people don't like the characters, people like the story more, people like the lore. This is part of the Eldest Curses series.
I love that part.
And this book explains, well, what does that mean? What is an Eldest Curse? Cassandra Clare manages to carve out just this brilliant slice of the Shadowhunters world that you didn't know you needed, and I thought, man, that sparks a lot of wonder and joy in me. That there is
and
lore.
then the book ends, and you're like, what the?
It's just great.
Literally.
And so I'm actually looking forward to that.
I need the Lost Book of the White so badly, so far away. The next book. You may have already seen this book because it was also in our rereads and runners up video for Macky's side.
My eyes.
However, it ranks really high on my list because every time I'm reading one of these books, I'm so consumed that I always almost immediately finish. Like, it only takes me 2 or 3 days because I'm so interested in what's going on, even when I'm traveling. And I'm always constantly yelling at Macky about it.
I have nothing but praise for this author, but I think she's doing this on purpose to annoy the people.
Keeper of the Lost Cities by Shannon Messenger.
She's so good.
We've already talked about this series a lot, but basically Sophie discovers that she is not in fact human, she's actually an elf, and so she gets whisked away to this elven world where she discovers that not only is she an elf, she's actually a special kind of elf because she's part of this conspiracy
that
in
nobody knows
that
anything
nobody
about,
knew
that is
anything about.
rocking pretty much the entire world. And the fate of the world depends on that secret.
That's the basic premise of this series. I have to say, I personally really like it because I think it combines a lot of things that I truly love. So, great world building, first of all, because that was one of the very first things I noticed in this book.
Very
great characters. I love that she keeps making the cast bigger and bigger, and that she keeps giving me reasons to care about everyone in the cast. Whether or not I love them in terms of other relationships in this story, that's a whole different thing, but like, loving the character, that's easy. There's so many of them that I love. She also has this really great talent of like telling a story that is compelling in its own right and then dropping a bomb on you where it's like, oh, by the way, you thought that was it? Nope. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger with every book, and it's so impressive because it's still so compelling. I'm flying through this series. I love it. I enjoy it so much. I enjoy yelling about it. I enjoy discussing it. I think the way that she weaves in themes that are unexpected into Sophie's story are really great. I like what she does with the world itself and how she drops details and doesn't actually give you the expansion until she's good and ready to give it to you.
The world just keeps expanding. It's great.
She's a really good writer.
Love it. Yeah,
she's
love her.
She's really great. Moving on to number 4 is a book that I read. Actually, I don't know if I read it on a whim or because I saw someone else talk. I think I might have seen my friends Hannah and Gabby talk about it. It was a book that was on my radar because I'm familiar with the author, but I haven't really loved anything that recently came out of hers. And then I decided I would give this one a try because A, the cover is gorgeous, B, it sounded really interesting, and C, I heard great things about the audiobook. So the book is Lovely War by Julie Berry. This book is so good. It is a World War I, World War II story, and it tells the story of 2 couples during that era. However, it's told by Aphrodite to Hephaestus, Hades, and a bunch of other gods that show up later on. And it's so fascinating that the author chose to frame her story in this way because each of those gods that she uses is known for a specific thing, and they're connected very strongly to the actual storyline of the couples. I loved it. I think the audiobook is the way to go if you're going to read it because, again, it's got a full cast, and it tells this story in a way that just makes it more emotional because music is a big aspect of it, and that comes into play a lot in the audiobook. Not to say that you probably wouldn't experience it if you've read the book, but I think it's more poignant if you're listening to it. So basically, we're watching Aphrodite tell Hephaestus and Hades and whoever else shows up at this point in the story these 2 love stories. And there is a reason for her to be doing so because at the very beginning of the story she gets caught by Hephaestus, and it's like she's taking to the witness stand basically and just telling something, and there's a point to it and you don't get the point until the end of the story, but it's so beautifully done. It's so poignant. I loved hearing about both of these couples and the things that they had to face during the course of the war. It was an interesting and fascinating take, and I haven't read a lot of World War fiction recently. Like, I haven't read a lot of that, so to read something like this and to feel so transported and so in that moment with the author's words, it was an incredible experience, and I would highly recommend checking it out for sure. So the next book I'm going to talk about, number 3, is a book I fairly recently read. I'm glad I read it before the end of the year. It actually completely obliterated everything else on this list to make it to number 3, which it deserves, and that book is Call Down the Hawk by Maggie Stiefvater. Here's the thing about Call Down the Hawk. I knew I was going to really enjoy it because it centers around my favorite character from the Raven cycle, and that character is Ronan Lynch. This next thing I'm going to say is obviously going to spoil this series, the Raven cycle series, for you, so if you don't want to know, just come back when I've set the book down. Ronan Lynch is a dreamer, and that means he can dream things up and actually take them out of his dreams. That's his talent. And in this book, dreamers are being targeted and killed because there is like this prophetic vision that one of them is going to cause the end of the world. You're tying that storyline in with Ronan trying to figure out what to do about his life and his future as a dreamer, and also the story of his other brothers, Matthew, the younger one, who you will know has a very specific connection to dreams as well if you've read the Raven cycle. And then there's Declan, the older one, who's just trying to hold it all together, even if that means he as a regular human being has to go into worlds like the fairy black market just to help protect his brothers. And so everything is getting tied together, tied together, tied together. It's hard to explain this book without spoiling it in general, and I went into it knowing nothing except that it was about Ronan Lynch, the dreamer, and how he and his brothers were trying to navigate the world after the events of the Raven cycle, and about the people who are trying to kill dreamers. I knew nothing except that. Honestly, experiencing it that way was just a pleasant way to do it because you get so surprised by every twist and turn that the story takes. I don't know how Macky I does it. Like, she just comes up with these convoluted plot lines that make no sense whatsoever at the beginning. She puts in characters that you're not even sure about at the beginning. And then by the end of the book, you're like, okay, what's happening next? I need to know. Like, I need to know. And I care so deeply about all these characters. Like, it's the same magic that I experienced reading The Raven Boys. It's the same, but it's different because it has a different focus this time. It's not so much like the magical ley line and the dead king. This is like real life situations where people are getting killed for a talent that they specifically possess. And also this talent could also be killing them in a different way. It's so fascinating. It's so hard to explain. But I loved it so much. Like, I was so, like, there for this entire story. And I'm so mad that I have to wait, like, an entire year for the next one. But it was so, so good. My number 2 and number 1 could probably get switched around just based on the day and the mood I'm in. But for right now, my number 2 is a series that Macky actually recommended I read. And I actually had to reread the first book before I got to the other 2. And the series is Diviners Trilogy. It starts with Kushiel's Dart, and then continues with Kushiel's Chosen, and then ends with Kushiel's Avatar. The entire series centers around Phaedra. She is adopted as a child into the household of Anafiel Delane, and she is adopted for a very specific reason because he thinks that she has an ability that he can use to his advantage. And so she grows up being trained as a spy, but also as a courtesan, because Phaedra actually happens to be an Anguisset. And what an Anguisset is... An
Anguisset just happens to be... so in this world, there are several angels that have descended to accompany, controversially, the child of the blood of the Messiah and the tears of the Magdalene, coming together to form this one guy who founded that entire nation. And one of his companions, Kushiel, the angel of punishment, one of God's punishers, every so often blesses an individual with his dart. It's like a red
mote in
the eye. And that person is the ultimate submissive. Anybody who is pricked with Kushiel's dart
finds pleasure in pain.
Finds pleasure in pain. All kinds of pain, be it emotional or be it humiliation, all the BDSM stuff. It comes naturally to Phaedra, and so with Anafiel sort of playing the longer game of thrones in the kingdom of Teradiange, Phaedra becomes a very, very important
key player in that game.
Yeah, in that game.
So this is a story that has war element to it. It also has political intrigue. It has...
Which Alexa had to point out to me. There's a lot of court intrigue.
Yeah, there's adventure, there's journey type stuff in this, there's a quest type thing in this story.
There's lore and the divine.
There's just so much to recommend this series. First of all, like Macky is saying, the lore itself is also really, really interesting. And with every book, you kind of get bigger insight into this entire world and all of these angels and all of their descendants, and you kind of understand a little better how things are going. And it's so rich. Like, it's so easy to separate the different countries that are mentioned in the story in your mind because she does a really good job making them unique, and they sort of feel inspired by real life places and people, but they're also not, and you know it because it's a fantasy story. And then there's also the political structure that she's set up, which is brilliant.
Also just like
Teradiange alone has a very interesting political setup, but then you throw in all of the other things that slowly come into play over the course of the rest of the books, and you're just like, how did we even... What?
It's really great. And at the core of this thing is a young woman who, in her predisposition to yield, is able to use that in order to save everybody that she loves and the nation that she hails from.
Well, since he already preempted it, I was going to say that the other thing that I enjoy about the story, this series actually, outside of the plot and the world, you know, the political structure and everything about that, the characters are actually what make this story even better for me, because there's so many of them, and they're such an interesting cast, because no one is actually purely evil. Like, I think some of them are purely evil, but for the most part, a lot of the main players in this story are very gray. They don't always do the right thing, but sometimes they do it for the right reasons. Sometimes it's the opposite. They'll do the right thing
for the wrong reasons.
But it's the wrong reasons. It's a really interesting interplay of all these different personalities and how they come together and fall apart and come together again. And I really, really enjoyed it. It really requires you to like deep dive into this world, because reading them back to back to back was a really great idea on my part, because you're just so immersed in the story and these characters and what they are and who they become. Phaedra in particular is the standout character in this series, because you see her transformation from when she's a child to becoming this woman who knows who she is, what she's capable of, what she wants, and what she'll choose to do for the one she loves. And that character journey is the thing that really makes the series resonate so deeply with me, and I loved it so much. So obviously it deserves a top spot on this list. It's funny because the very last thing I'm going to mention is a series where I don't own the physical copies because there are specifics that I want and I haven't bought them yet. But I do own them on audiobook, and those books are the Diviners Trilogy that is out so far. The 4th book comes out in February. So it's the Diviners, Lair of Dreams, and Before the Devil Breaks You. I should have known going into this that I would love this book. Okay, I'm set up to like it because it is basically set in 1920s New York City, and it features a group of individuals who are called diviners because they have different special abilities. And Evie O'Neill is the main character in the first book. And in that first one, again, we have a murder mystery setup. She is helping her uncle investigate these mysterious murders that have been happening in New York City. They come to find out that there is sort of a paranormal aspect connected to that. But not only do they find that out, they also find out that the diviners are a group of people that actually exist, and there are more than one of them. And so that book is just a great introduction to the world. It's a great mystery. It's really exciting. It gives you these characters you really enjoy and come to care about. I liked all of that. And then I read the second book and I was like, there's no way that could top the first book. Like, no, there's no way. It did. The second book focuses on a mystery again, and this time it is a mystery centered in New York City where people are falling asleep and then they're being devoured by their sleep. Eventually, their body just caves in on them because someone is sucking the energy through their dreams. And it's so good. It has a little bit heavier on the paranormal aspect there, but it's so fascinating. They introduce more characters. They give you more insight into the diviners. You see developing relationships between everyone in this little group that has now formed in New York City. And it's so good. I was so impressed. I was like, this is great. This is also going to get a full 5 stars from me. And then I picked up the third book and I was like, okay, there's no way that it could possibly consistently
get better.
And then I read the third book. Unlike the other 2 books, this one has no central mystery to it. It's really just the group of diviners that have now come together, exploring their abilities individually and as a group. And it's also them trying to dig up their own history and how they came to be. They also find that they are kind of at the center of a conflict now because there are a lot of opposing opinions about if diviners are godly or not godly, etc. They're still trying to figure out, like, to get ahead of this prophecy that involves them, where the end of the world is coming and they have to be the ones to stand and face it. First of all, that premise alone, I already love it. But second of all, I just love the group of diviners so much already that obviously by the time the third book came, I was like, okay, I love them. And just seeing them continue to grow and find out things and react to these things and like everything developing, so good. I will say the third book is the one that scared me the most. Like, there were so many moments in that book where I was just like terrified and I'm like, I can't keep reading. I can't do it. Jane will attest to this because she was the person I was talking to the entire time I was reading it. I was just like, oh my god, what's gonna happen? I can't stand it. I don't know. I'm really stressed out. And she's like, just keep reading. And I'm like, but I can't because I'm really stressed out. It's so good. It's such a great series. It not only gives you a full cast of characters to fall in love with and a world with like excellent world building, it's also a story that incorporates a lot of themes that are relevant whether it's today or in the 1920s. I just don't know how she did it. Like, she blended all of these things together into this story and it's so impressive. It's so good. I love it so much. I'm dying for the 4th book. It's just amazing and incredible, and it totally deserves my #1 spot, at least today. Totally deserves that #1 spot. So that was my #1 read, technically #1 series, read in 2019.
Awesome. Winding down to my top 5. I'm gonna kick things off with shocker, Ghost of the Shadow Market.
A Shadowhunters book.
Oh look, a Shadowhunters book has appeared. A wild Shadowhunters book has appeared. Though I did love that Magnus and Alec sort of buddy cop thing, and that was great. I don't love them as much as Alexa did, but there are some stories here that I particularly thought was devastating. This is a companion to the Shadowhunter series where Cassandra Clare and a bunch of authors decide to write short stories to sort of supplement sort of the lore, set in different time periods throughout the entire thing. So there was one that was centered on Magnus Spain, and that was cool. There was one that was centered on Simon, and that was great. And then this one is centered on Jem Carstairs and his journey from sort of being a silent brother all the way to where he is now. It's set throughout pretty much time because as a silent brother, Jem has sort of survived several kind of things. And it touches on some of the characters in the Chain of Gold series that is coming up soon, which are the kids of the next generation of that particular London Institute, which to me is why I love this book so much. And then there is the foreshadowing of what is to come in the present day after the events of the Dark Artifices trilogy. So, oh my god. So I love this so much. I devoured it pretty much in the same day that we got the arc. Highly recommend it to any Shadowhunters fans. If you're not a fan of Jem Carstairs, maybe you want to stay away. I'm just saying.
True.
It's a PSA.
If you don't enjoy Jem, well, it's not if you're not a fan of Jem Carstairs. It's more like if you're not a fan of Jem Carstairs and his relationship.
That's right. If you're not,
Because otherwise, if you like Gem, like as
then
a
yeah,
character,
this is great. But if you don't like that sort of aspect of it, it's like me trying so hard to get through all of like the Keeper books because I'm not a huge fan of the ship. It's just hard, and that's fine. And it doesn't take anything away from how good the series is. My number 4 is a graphic novel series by Joe Hill. Lock and Key is a story about a house with a bunch of keys that do insanely crazy things.
I don't even want to know.
One key can sort of open up a person's brain, and you can sort of pick things and put things back in. Another key, if you put it in the door and you walk through the door, your spirit leaves your body and you can astral travel, and your body pretty much looks dead. It's super creepy and scary, and it's this family who comes back to that house because they have ties to it, and then the kids discover these keys. And the mystery behind what happened to them, and it blows up to this giant thing. I think Netflix is making it a series, but for those of you who want a paranormal that is not paranormal YA, because this is full on just sort of paranormal, but it's coming of age, which is a weird slice, so go figure. I like it. I highly recommend this book series.
That is a weird slice of life.
It's growing up with crazy.
Growing up with ghosts.
Growing up with crazy is what that is. Number 3 would be the Teen Titans run by Jeff Johns. Now, as I mentioned, there is the Beast Boy Starfire. Sort of everybody knows what that Teen Titans is. As mainstream as that is I want to say the second generation of popular Titans, or the next, or the
I think so. I would say second.
The most intermediate generation, because there's been several sort of iterations that have happened in and around that particular Beast Boy, Raven, Starfire kind of Teen Titans. But this is actually, I want to say, the most recent for the reboot generation of Titans, before they took Cyborg out and made him one part of the Justice League, that kind of thing. But in this particular, Jeff Johns, genius of the DC universe, stable of writers, decides to pass the baton of Starfire, Raven, that particular, to a next generation of Titans. So there is a new Robin on here, which is played by Tim Drake. There is a new Wonder Girl, because Donna Troy has become Donna Troy, and her name is Cassie Sandsmark.
Yeah.
There is the first time a super person on the team, Connor Kent.
Oh, Connor.
And they sort of formed like a junior version of the
Trinity?
Of the DC Trinity. For the first time, there is a Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman sort of Trinity in the Titans. Back then, they had the Flash, Batman, Wonder Woman sort of thing with Donna, Dick, and Wally. And then, of course, Raven, Cyborg, Beast Boy sort of created. But there was never really a super.
Because they never had a super.
I don't know if Supergirl ever joined at all. But
like officially.
But even Jason Todd was the Titan for a while, and that was a problem. Yeah, and he was very like salty about that, but as we will find out in the series. But what I love about this was because this particular batch of new Titans, right? So you've got Cyborg and sort of Starfire playing sort of mentors, are the dregs. Like Wonder Woman said, Cassie is not joining this thing. Tim Drake is like, Batman's like, okay, you know what? You're gonna lead them someday too, just like Dick. And then Con-El is just like, he used to be Lex Luthor's like, child and poster child. I'm the new Superman back when Superman sort of died. And so these are the dregs. These are the Titans that nobody wants to trust, that will break the rules, and they're making a name for themselves. And it's so great. It really feels like we're the losers club, but now we're,
I like that.
Trying to make a name for ourselves. Underdogs popularity-wise, but in no shape, form, or fashion in terms of strength and the ability to just be awesome. So, new era of the Titans, very, very cool. So glad that I was able to read all 3 volumes. And my top 2 read of 2019 would be everything Grisha. Leigh Bardugo has managed to create a world. Well, here's the thing, right? It was one of my bookish resolutions to actually read the Grishaverse, and I did.
Yep.
I did. It was great. All of it. Absolutely all of it. I want to feature Ruin and Rising because this is the 3rd book in the 1st trilogy. It's a story about a young girl who discovers that she's Grisha, which means she has abilities, but she has an ability that has not been seen in the longest time. And her ability is actually the key to perhaps defeating this terrible darkness, literal darkness, that is sort of cloaking the land and birthing terrible, creepy creature crawlies that are the Volcra. And how she is literally the one thing that could save the entire nation and affect the world. And Alina Starkov, that's her name, makes a name for herself. Sometimes a name that even she thinks that she has believed is too big for her to even carry. And she becomes a figure in the sort of the world of the Grisha and her particular kingdom. Trilogy ends, it's magnificent, out of nowhere. And because Leah's like thinking, this is an awesome world to write more, we have Six of Crows and the Crooked Kingdom. It's a duology. I don't read duologies, but this is my favorite duology now, I think. This is a story set in the same world, but this time it's about, it's set in a different area. It's about a bunch of dregs. There are a bunch of thieves and gangs and mercenaries, and you just love them so much. It's a heist story.
In the first one, anyway.
In the first one, that becomes a rescue op in the second one. That is all the feels of Ocean's 11 and Ocean's 12 and Ocean's 13 and Ocean's 8, because it's just that good. I actually like this better than the first trilogy.
Me too. That's my favorite.
Because the characters are so compelling. There's a cameo in this particular series.
I screamed when I read it.
That was probably so good that that cameo spawned his own series called...
He was already great in the first one.
King of Scars. And yes, he was already great anyway to begin with, but... King of Scars is the newest sort of like companion. Is this a duology as well?
Yes.
And then the next one is coming out
2021.
2021 focuses on said King of Scars, whoever he is. And so great character, easily a fan favorite. And the fact that he gets his own book
my favorite.
is just it's my favorite too. He gets his own book is just magnificent.
Though you have to point out the fact that it's not necessarily just his book. There are two other people that share
which I think
in his story.
Which is a testament to Leigh Bardugo's writing style, where she'll center the book on an A-plot character, which is the sort of titular character. So Alina Starkov, you've got Kaz Brekker, and then of course Mr. King of Scars over here. Too many spoilers. Side characters are so compelling. There are no throwaway characters in any of Leigh Bardugo's books.
I agree.
You want to throw some of them
away.
Maybe against a wall to wake them up a little bit. But you love them so much anyway, and that's why they've made my number 2 spot. And the only reason they are not on the number 1 spot is because of nostalgia, pure nostalgia. Because my number 1 book series that I read, which was also part of my bookish resolutions for 2019 that I was able to do, is called the Fushigi Genbu Kaiden.
Which, before he gets into that, it's also going to be part of my manga shoutouts.
So we're going to like transition and start talking about this together right now.
Ta-da!
So it's book 1 of the manga series. Now, for those of you who grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s, Fushigi Yugi was an anime that made a heck of a lot of waves globally. Written by Yu Watase. It's a portal story, right? It's a story about a young girl. Fushigi Yugi, the first, is a story about a young girl who stumbles upon a book that portals her into that specific medieval world, where the lore is that priestesses from another universe will come and awaken their particular god, whether it's the north, south, east, or the western god, and assume the powers of God and grant 3 wishes.
Yep.
And Miyaka, gets portaled into that. Best friend sort of gets involved, and is she or is she not like the other goddess? And there's this whole thing, and that was a huge epic journey. The Genbu Kaiden is actually the prequel to that. The first girl who was ever brought into that world. So if you've loved the Fushigi Yugi series, this is a wonderful addition to that particular bit of lore. If you start out with this, fine. Yeah. It's okay.
But it won't resonate as much as
it won't resonate as much because the build-up is great. And what's great about this series is that when the priestess comes in, she has to be surrounded by her 7 star warriors, who are basically like embodiments of every single constellation in that particular sky. So the northern skies has their 7 constellations. Yes. 7 all the way through. The first series that happened sort of in the present centered around the east and the western gods of Seiryu and Suzaku.
Yep.
So the phoenix and the dragon god. I want to say this is the northern god.
Yeah, turtle.
Genbu, the turtle dragon god. There's politics. Whoever controls the power of the priestess controls pretty much the world. So it's a harem story. That's
reverse harem story.
It's a reverse harem story. But for the first time, she's not in love with absolutely everyone. Or everyone's not, it's just different characters, and all 7 of these characters are so compelling. Everyone has their own little story arcs. It is classic shoujo adventure.
It's actually structured very much like the original Fushigi Yugi, except different because of the character.
And I think that her writing is better in this one,
yes.
Because she's had the weight of all of the years, and she's seen what her mega series has done. So for her to put that much skill and love into this prequel is just so good and so painful.
It was.
It's
just insert pork face for me here.
Yeah,
that was literally me the entire. I'll have you know, I was reading the series, like binge reading it for Otaku-a-thon, which, by the way, is happening again in 2020.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was binge reading this entire series for Otaku-a-thon. This one was on a plane. So imagine me having no one to scream at and literally just being like...
So copy paste pork face for the next like 46 hours.
Just gonna put it over my face.
Because if you've seen a pork screaming, that was Alexa the entire time she was reading the
same.
It was the greatest thing.
I'm so like stressed just
the greatest
about
thing.
It.
Fans of Fushigi Yugi, jump right in. If you haven't seen Fushigi Yugi, go try to watch it.
Watch that first.
It's on Amazon Prime, I think, and I want to say Crunchyroll.
Yeah.
Or if you want to just jump straight in, that's fine too. It is chronological. This is the first one that happened in chronological order. It's one of the best magical girl series of all time. I want to say
it really stands the test of time.
It really, really does, and it's become a fan favorite. That's the other thing too. I mean,
I would say
cult classic. Like, not everybody loves, like, Evil Dead, you know what I mean? But for those who love Evil Dead, oh yeah, cult classic. I would say Fushigi has achieved that kind of standard.
Yeah. There's only one other manga I want to shout out, and that is Kiss Me at the Stroke of Midnight, which is by Rin Mikimoto. And this came onto my radar because of Kristen from Super Space Chick.
Kristen, yes.
The premise of this is that Hinana is like your typical good girl honor student, but she's always dreamed of falling in love. And it just so happens that her school is being used as a filming location for this upcoming movie starring this guy named Keita Yase. And they end up meeting, like, in the most random, like, meet cute ever. And they start having a relationship. And the entire series just focuses on the ups and downs of that entire thing for both of them. Hinana as an ordinary girl, and Kate obviously as, like, this famous person dating an ordinary girl. I just love this series. I enjoy it so much. It is literally the premise right out of, like, Tiny Teen Alexa's fanfiction dreams, which is part of the reason I enjoy it so much. And it just continues to get more and more entertaining. It's funny and it's heartwarming in equal turns with each volume, and I enjoyed it so much, so it deserves a shout out. Speaking of shout outs, we're gonna quickly go through like 2020 books that deserve a shout out, because there are a few that I've read that I really enjoyed. So the first is The Map from Here to There by Emery Lord, which is the companion sequel to The Start of Me and You, which I mentioned in our rereads and runners up video. This basically is the senior year for Paige and her friends, and they are all trying to come to terms with their relationships and like that feeling of you want to make the most of your senior year with your friends, but also like it's the only thing standing between you and your future, and that's a big life choice that you're making. And so that's what this book tackles, and it's so well done. And then we have Love Boat Taipei, which is by Abigail Hing Wen. The main character in this is Ever Wong, and she is sent by her parents to go to this program, study abroad program in Taiwan. Only everyone has nicknamed that program Love Boat because no one actually takes it seriously, and like it's usually like hookups and parties and all that stuff. And Ever has been so restricted all her life, and she's kind of chafing at the bit a little bit, especially because her parents are also going to dictate her future. And she feels like she owes it to them to follow the future that they want for her. And in this book, she kind of explores the possibility of being who she really wants to be, but also honoring her culture and her parents at the same time. And it's so fascinating, and it moved me so deeply while I was reading it, so would also recommend that. And the last book, I'm sorry, it's gonna come out in June 2020, but it's worth the wait. It's Where Dreams Descend by Janella Angeles. And this book is comped with Moulin Rouge and Phantom of the Opera, and you will definitely see those elements in there. It is about a magician named Kalia, and she has all her life really just been performing in this one house until one day she decides that she wants to leave and go and explore the world outside, and she ends up in a city where there is a competition being held for magicians. The people running the competition don't really want females participating because they're not supposed to be the sort of like showman type magicians. Kalia proves them wrong because she's extremely talented, and so she gets into the competition, and the entire book follows her as she continues to fight to win this competition, but discovers that there may actually be something more sinister connected to her magic and the people in the competition. So
that's kind of cool.
Very good, worth checking out. That is the end of this best books of 2019
yeah,
video.
It was good to sort of like look back on everything.
I feel like every video that we make for the best of, I always love seeing it because we're so enthusiastic about all the things that we're talking about. Like it's great, it's wonderful. So I really hope you guys maybe find something new to read, or maybe also agree with us that these are some of the best books you've ever read.
Just really, really great to sort of look back and say, yeah, you know, and between Alexa and myself, we read about like what I bring about like 130 books. Alexa's average is about 200 books, I want to say.
That's like 350 books.
Yeah, and so and that's a whole lot. I mean, of course, a lot of that is graphic novels from my end because that's what I just love to read. No, but to narrow them down is painful, but necessary, I think, because you know you sort of want to earmark the ones that you like, and these are the ones that we do.
Tell us what your favorite books of 2019 were. We'd love to hear.
What made you feel the most?
Yeah, what made you scream the most? Because you know that's always the thing.
In a good way, good.
In a good way, not the terrible screaming way,
like
not
good,
the throw your book across the room way.
Yeah, like justified pouring face. That's how.
We're just gonna put that over my face every time I talk about a book I really like now. But anyway, we hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you guys for another one soon. Bye.